I'm okay, Tim. I've started it.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Judy, and welcome everyone to a webinar on forest kindergartens, or as we were subtitling it, Waldkindergarten in Germany. And some of you Green Teacher readers will know that that Judy Kane, our presenter, who I'm going to introduce to you in a moment, co-wrote a wonderful article with her daughter called Waldkindergarten in Germany in the most recent issue, the fall issue of Green Teacher. And so I was delighted when she also agreed to do this webinar. I'm hoping well, let me just walk through this sort of introduction here, just to give you a sense of where we're going this evening. Judy will speak for 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask questions and typing into an open box on the last slide and submitting your questions. I will relay them to Judy. At the end of the 60 minutes, we will have an end session evaluation. If there are more questions to be answered, and Judy's got a bit of time. I didn't actually ask her, but if she does, Judy, I'm happy to stay around myself for a little bit. But you don't have to wait until I finish speaking or Judy has finished her presentation to ask a question or make a comment about something that she says. If you have a comment, a question, a technical difficulty, please take advantage of the chat box, as you can see some people already have in the bottom left-hand corner. And the way you do that, if you're not familiar, is in the very extreme bottom left-hand corner of your screen is a little horizontal box that says Main Room. And to the right of that is a blank horizontal box. And if you type a message into that horizontal box and hit Enter on your keyboard, that's going to push the message up into your message up into the chat box for all to see. You can even direct it to one person. You can open up the main room and see it's a drop-down menu with all of our names. And you can send a private message to me or to anyone else. Obviously, Judy's not going to be able to follow the questions, but I can respond. And if you have technical difficulties, of course, I want to hear that. So. But we're not going to speak of technical difficulties. Judy and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about them over the last week, and we're delighted that we seem to be beyond them. If you're not familiar with Green Teacher, let me just say a word. As the host organization, for 20 years we've been publishing Green Teacher magazine. Judy, if you can advance the slide there. Some of you are familiar with it, and we have been publishing what I would like to say are the most innovative articles, activities, and lesson plans developed by youth educators working inside and outside, elementary, middle, and high school classrooms. And in the past 10 years, we've had the pleasure of publishing 6 books, mostly comprised of articles that once appeared in the magazine. Green Teacher remains suffice it to say, remains an unprofitable nonprofit. So if you find tonight's webinar is useful, but you're not yet a subscriber, please do consider taking out a subscription or purchasing one of our books, because that'll enable us to keep offering this series of free webinars. As you heard moments ago from that authoritative mechanical voice, this presentation is being archived, and non-subscribers can freely view it for the next month. So don't feel compelled to take any notes, and feel free to if you find it worthwhile, to encourage your friends to have a look at it over the next month. They too will have to register for a webinar in order to sync their computer with this WIMBA classroom, as you have done. But as you know, it's a fairly painless process. So, anyways, without further ado, let me. And one more thing. Two more things actually. Those of you needing a certificate, by all means, don't hesitate to send me an email afterwards to tim@greenteacher.com, and I'll prepare one and email it back to you. And secondly, I mentioned that there'll be an end of 60 minutes from now or so, 55 minutes, we'll have an end of webinar survey of 5 quick questions. Take about 90 seconds to fill out, and 2 of you who do will be the lucky winners of a draw for 2 free 1-year digital subscriptions to Green Teacher Incentive. We really appreciate your feedback, your candid feedback on all of our webinars. Now, finally, without further ado, I'm really delighted to be able to to introduce Judy Kane. She's now a retired teacher. She was an assistant head of school and a curriculum director in her hometown of Alexandria, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. She's been interested for a long time in non-traditional approaches to learning and in ways to communicate why and how children need to play, to learn conflict management skills, and to practice metacognition. Judy, a warm welcome. And again, for those who were not in the warm-up with us, we're very lucky. Not only have we conquered the technical challenges, but I'm happy to be speaking to you on a street in Alexandria, Virginia, that actually has electrical power tonight.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the Waldkindergarten, or the forest kindergarten. As Tim said, I am Judy Kane, and the research in this particular webinar is provided by Amanda. This webinar is based on our trip last February and our subsequent article in Green Teacher magazine to visit the Waldkindergarten in the Dusseldorf area of Germany. We visited 5 of them, one each day over a week. And we purposefully went in February when it was cold because we wanted to see children in a weather scenario that was not necessarily ideal. And it was, in fact, bitter cold that whole week. I'm beginning this presentation by focusing first on fantasy play and on fantasy play in nature, because those are essential elements of the programs we saw in Germany, as opposed to other nature programs, which may include direct nature and environmental instruction. By now, I hope you've all introduced yourselves in the chat box. Feel free to begin writing your questions and comments.
And Judy, do you want people to mention where they're from and all that stuff?
Where they're from, if they're Waldkindergarten in their areas or Waldkindergarten in the U.S. and Canada that they know about, that we can start networking and making a database, that would be wonderful. Theorists and developmental psychologists who study how children learn agree that young children learn best when they explore and discover on their own and in an environment that stimulates and facilitates fantasy play and that allows children to construct meaning through that play. This play comes from the children. It's how young children learn. And it is this fantasy play that supports learning in a Waldkindergarten. Oops, there we go. Researchers are beginning to study the effects of nature on cognitive, affective, emotional, and physical development of children. I skipped a slide. I'm sorry. Fantasy play. Scientists, mathematicians, and engineers are curious, creative, and innovative problem solvers. They are divergent, transformative, and adaptive thinkers. Fantasy play supports these behaviors and kinds of thinkers in young children. Children construct meaning from their world by creating scenarios using objects and ideas that they have chosen, as opposed to externally imposed ideas from adults. Now, Tim, I'm going to have a little bit of technical difficulty here because I can't go down on the right-hand side for the content to get any beyond frame 12.
Okay, so maybe what I'll do then, Judy, if I can, is I will start advancing the slides for you, and you just say go when you need me to switch them.
Okay.
Give me a moment here. I'll try 13 right away, and then I'll switch over. I'll to start the slides again. It'll just take a. Is that where you want to be?
Yes, thank you. Researchers are beginning to study the effects of nature on cognitive, affective, emotional, and physical development of children. Amanda Kane, who we mentioned earlier, who had traveled with me and who co-wrote the Waldkindergarten article with me, aligned the findings of many of these researchers with what we know about fantasy play and learning. The information from the following slides comes from her studies, and her sources are listed at the end of this slide presentation. Okay. Tim, next slide. Tim?
I did. It's the next slide is up actually. It shows a river, a stream with a road along the side of it. Are you seeing that?
No. But I can go on without it. Rachel Seba is a developmental psychologist who did a study about the direct experiences that children have with nature. Next slide. Did you get
It's up?
it? Even before these thinking strategies of hypothesizing and synthesis come other thinking skills such as sorting, comparing, and classifying, also supported by what children do in nature. Next slide. Is it up?
No,
Oh,
I'm trying I'm trying something else just so I can do this better. Is that the slide you want?
I want the next one. Great. Got it.
Can you see that now, Judy?
Yes. Thank you. Sapansky cited studies about the relationship of nature and well-being, such as relieving stress, improving concentration, heightening alertness, and decreasing a tendency to conflict. One of these studies by Wells found that exposure to nature helped children deal with life stress and helped them to handle adversity. Next one. The obesity epidemic is related, obviously, to the lack of outdoor playtime. Next one, Tim. Research has found that movement and different kinds of movements are related to brain development. And clearly, children get a lot more movement when they're outside. Next one, Tim. The fundamental guiding principles of the Waldkindergarten reflect the research about how children learn and how that learning is enhanced in nature. Next. The Waldkindergarten are outdoor schools for young children ages 3, sometimes as young as 2, to 6. These schools have no walls. Children are outside in the woods all day, in all seasons, and in all weather. There are over 700 Waldkindergarten in Germany. Kindergarten, by the way, is a term that encompasses all children ages 2 to 6. Formal education, including national standards, does not begin in Germany or in most other European countries until a child is 6 or 7. This again supports research on early learning. Next. All Waldkindergarten schools have a similar schedule. They have morning circle, play, breakfast, more play, and then closing circle. Some children stay until noon or 1, others stay later. Next. Next slide.
I'm now looking at the slide that's of the sheds. Can you see that?
Yeah, we're all set. Each school has a shed at the edge of the woods for drop-off, for shelter in case of extreme weather, and for storage. Sheds generally have a table and benches, and they have shelves for art and craft materials, for books, for equipment such as magnifying glasses, flower presses, maul, shovels, and rakes, and musical instruments. While such human-made materials are sometimes used for learning and play, the main focus of Waldkindergarten is on objects found in nature. Some sheds also have a makeshift toilet and a small heater. Next. On this bitter cold morning, children are eating their breakfast inside a shed. Excuse me, notice the lit candle. Next. The morning circle is for greetings, for deciding jobs, and for choosing a spot to go to for the day. The play areas in the woods for this group of children have inviting names that describe their physical features like climbing spot and seesaw and water wheel. The globe is to find the United States of America in honor of us, their visitors. Next. Jobs include counting the group before heading out to make sure everyone is present, checking the road into the play area for cars, helping to pull the wagon or carrying the tissue container. Next. And on the way back, carrying a large pair of tweezers and a bucket to pick up any trash. The jobs reinforce the importance of belonging to and being responsible to the community. This sense of belonging and responsibility is especially important for these young children because their school lacks walls and a roof to give a sense of togetherness. Next. Children know the rules for going to their spot in the woods. They proceed at their own pace if they want to, but they must stop at designated areas if they run ahead to wait for the others. The most interesting thing we notice about these children when they walk to the woods in the morning is their energy and stamina. If children straggle, they do so in order to investigate or collect a stone or a leaf or a feather or a branch along the way. Next. This is a washing hands assembly line. One teacher pours water over outstretched hands as another squirts soap. The children scrub, and a teacher passes again with water to rinse the hands. Towels are passed for drying hands. No one seems to notice that it's freezing. Next. Wiping noses and doing one's business. After children do their business in the woods, teachers cover it up with dirt and leaves. They use wipes to wash their hands and tissues for their noses. These are supplies that are carried into the woods each day. Other essentials include diapers and water for washing and for drinking. Next. Kids are amazingly healthy. The teachers report very few absences in the winter months, or any time for that matter. Next. Children use their imaginations to create fantasy objects from natural things. Some children here have found evergreen branches and are pretending to paint a tree using the branches as imaginary brushes. The branches are then transformed into brooms, and the children clean the forest floor. They are using materials without predetermined meaning for open-ended exploration. Next. One child pushes a knob on a tree to sound an imaginary fire alarm, and others run for safety. Creative fantasy play, where objects are transformed in countless ways, is an essential component in these schools. The symbolic fantasy play develops abstract thinking and comprehension of spatial relationships, skills that children do not get from traditional pencil and paper tasks or from toys with predetermined meanings. They are also role-playing and learning cooperative social skills, other important developmental tasks. Next.
Judy, I'll just jump in here just to make it easier. From now on, I'll just turn the slides whenever you pause.
Okay, that works. This child creates a pulley system with a rope slung over a branch. Tied to the rope is a lacrosse stick, inside of which the child has put a ball. He pulls the rope and the stick is raised up with the ball. Exploration with simple machines. Two boys have woven their gloves and their scarves into some branches that they've stuck into a bench to create a space station. Kids collect leaves and feathers and pine cones and other things to sort, compare, classify, and explore. These children are lined up with their treasures to go home. Creative art from things found in nature. Kids make patterns and explore textures and properties. Sometimes they include man-made objects. This group art project has many dimensions, many textures, and many materials. Making a mud ball involves exploring the properties of dirt and water and testing what consistency works best. Mud and water provide endless possibilities for exploration. While children at this Waldkindergarten are using human-made objects in addition to those found in nature, they're manifesting their creativity through repurposing the items. What are all the ways we can use a shopping cart? Oh, back to the other one. Can you go back, Tim? All the ways we can use a shopping cart. 4 children transform a shopping cart from a vehicle, and they turn it upside down to make a little hut, and then they turn it back up to transform it into a climbing wall. Afterwards, the children investigate the cart's wheels. Okay, Tim. Kids know the boundaries, and no one goes out of sight of the group. Familiarity with the boundaries and the environment encourages risk-taking and builds on self-confidence. Gross motor development, balance, risk-taking, self-confidence. Children climb freely, sit up in the branches and talk, switch positions, and eventually maneuver their way down. They're developing gross motor and balance skills and self-confidence. Children at the Waldkindergarten have the luxury of time. Children are unhurried and have time to explore and discover at their own pace, in their own way, and without adult-imposed goals. An older child here is helping a younger child with gloves. Teachers at the Waldkindergarten told us many examples of how children use nature to help one another, such as finding a soothing plant to rub on a devil sting of another child. Children encourage one another to climb and to take risks. The open spaces seem to diminish conflicts. Here at Morning Circle, the children decide what they as a group want to do for the day and where in the woods they want to go. Consensus building. Being immersed in nature, exploring its wonders, learning what and what not to feed the animals and why, and learning not to leave human-made things all helps children develop empathy for the earth. Giving back to nature. Before the winter holiday break at Christmas time, children in one of the Waldkindergarten redefined gift giving to have a special gift giving time for the animals instead. They decorated one of the trees with special treats for the animals. When they returned from their vacation, they went to the tree to see that the animals had received and eaten their gifts. When we visited the Waldkindergarten, we were struck by the children's self-confidence, by their eagerness to take risks, and by their ability to make good decisions and self-regulate. We saw healthy, happy children embrace nature with both vigor and empathy. We saw children who were allowed to be children, with the time, space, and environment to follow their natural curiosity and to make sense of their world. Adults do not teach. Rather, they allow learning to unfold naturally. These are some of the Waldkindergarten that we have found, these next 3 slides, in the USA and Canada. Some of them we found simply by Googling Waldkindergarten in the USA. And some also might be more like the 4-school concept of the UK. That concept is to involve, to get every child outside for up to 3 hours, at least once a week, for up to 10 weeks. Much of this involves nature instruction and activities. These programs are for all ages and not just the same. So there's a difference between the 4-school concept in the UK and also some of these schools that we found seem to have more of that concept than the true Waldkindergarten concept. I was going to talk about what you can do if you do not have access to the woods or if you have scheduling issues or other issues. But I found that there's another webinar on how you can re-envision your schoolyard, which if Tim goes back to the previous slide, you can see. Also sponsored by Green Teacher. And this looks like a wonderful follow-up to the program that I'm giving for anybody who thinks that they'd like to start, but they can't do a full immersion program. So I urge you all to sign up for this one as well.
And Judy, we have, that's very nice. I'm sure Sharon Danks is pleased to hear that she's with us tonight. And she is a great an inspired educator, and your comments about looking forward to her session are entirely
wonderful. And the last 3 slides are the resources that Amanda used for her research on the relationship of fantasy play and nature. And Tim, I believe you're going to make these available to participants in the next few days?
Absolutely. When I send out the follow-up email, probably by noon tomorrow, maybe even later tonight, I'll include all of these.
Great. Okay, so this concludes the slide presentation portion of this webinar, and I'm going to turn it over to Tim.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. And it's as someone who has been publishing a K-12 magazine, I was very, I've followed what's happening in the UK for years. And I really didn't understand until your presentation, just the tail end of your presentation, what the difference is between forest kindergartens in the UK, which is a big movement there, as you rightly noted, and the Waldkindergarten. And I can obviously, and I think probably most of us on this webinar would readily prefer the German model. And also, what you wouldn't have noticed, Judy, I should just tell you, is that you weren't 5 minutes into your presentation before the chat box was ablaze with people wanting figuring out how they can get copies of your slides and all that stuff. And but they also had a pretty healthy conversation about liability issues, and I'm going to just stop myself there just now in everyone to take advantage of the question slide here. If you have more than one question, I know we're going to have a lot here, but if you have more than one question, just type one at a time and then press submit, and then you'll get a blank screen again, and you can start typing again. Judy, you can already see a question from Jay Blackwood there in the chat room. What hours do these programs run each day in Germany, in the Waldkindergarten there?
The children come in the morning around, I can't remember, around 8 o'clock, 8 or 9, a regular arrival time for young children. And then most of the children stay till 12 or 1, and their parents pick them up. And some stay till around 2:45. So that would be comparable to, many of our daycare programs without the extended portion.
And the first two questions that have come in already are really both asking a good teacher question. What's the student-teacher or student-adult ratio typically in these Waldkindergarten?
I would say about 1 to 6.
And can you remind us of the ages? You were specific about Germany.
Children as young as 2, but mostly 3 to 6-year-olds. I would say there might be some 7-year-olds in some of these programs as well, because I know that they don't start their formal education, their formal standards, their deductive reasoning, any kind of formal learning until they're 6 or 7.
Another question, you showed a slide where there was a morning circle and you explained to us that the kids make a decision as to where to go that day. And someone is asking, what happens if half the kids want to go one place and half the kids want to go the other? Do they divide up as 2 groups?
No, they build consensus. And I asked a couple of the teachers about that, and nobody seemed to think that there was a problem ever in deciding where they wanted to go.
Well, that's really great. I mean, to develop consensus skills at an early age. I have to say, I don't know about anyone else on this webinar, but as I was watching this and enjoying each one, although I was struggling to keep ahead of you, Judy, with the slides, I just couldn't help thinking, boy, if I had the opportunity as a young person to go to Waldkindergarten, I'd probably be a better adult today than I am.
Exactly.
Judy, we have another question, another good one that I think is a very practical question is, from what you saw in Germany, can you describe the setting? We saw in all the pictures, these were sort of forest settings. Sometimes the kids are walking down tree lanes. Were any of the Waldkindergartens in schoolyards or adjacent to schoolyards or close to urban centers?
Some were actually in urban centers, but within a park within the urban center. I did not see any schools that were any schools per se. These were just a shed next to the woods, or a shed within a park, and that's just where they were. They just used their natural resources in their towns to be able to accommodate these children in these programs.
One of the other things that was very striking to me and to one of the questioners, of course, was the fact that here the kids just go through winter. They wash their hands when it's freezing out. And you mentioned this is Dusseldorf, which I guess is sort of southern Germany, but that's still pretty cold in the winter. And I really like the fact that kids are getting used to winter in such a natural way. One person was asking, making the good point that whenever lots of us try to, as teachers, you organize a field trip and half the kids show up without the winter clothing that would enable them to go outside. Does that ever happen in these Waldkindergarten?
Their philosophy is, I think I heard this first attributed to Norwegians, is there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. They have access to, I don't know, their equivalent of LL Bean or whatever, and everybody has the right clothing all the time. And they have changes of clothes in the sheds, I suppose, just like any early childhood program. But every child that we saw was properly dressed. And when they were wearing their seemingly cumbersome snowsuits and stuff, that didn't hold them back. But it was interesting because the snowsuits that they came in were filthy dirty. They had, maybe they get washed once a week, but they certainly don't get washed every day, and it didn't bother anyone.
Fantastic. A couple of questions that have just been typed in to the back office that I'm retrieving, and I'll try and get to a couple of those that have been in the chat room as well in a moment. One of which is there singing in the webinar, in the Waldkindergarten?
Oh, yes. They sing, and we saw some organized groups doing some sort of hand games and circle games and singing games and so forth. And they were all proud to sing some songs for us and so forth. I don't know whether that's really a regular part of their program. The singing certainly is, but whether or not these concept development kinds of activities in their circle games was for our benefit or whether they do it regularly. But they do have some things that they do. We even were at one Waldkindergarten. The kids were outside, and they had brought along some handwriting books and some spelling books. And some of the kids went to the wagon and got that, put a tarp down, and just wanted to do work. And so they did. Sat on the floor in the woods and did their work.
The sort of related question is, someone's asking, to what extent is literacy consciously approached?
Just as an aside, the way I mentioned that these children wanted to work in a workbook, a spelling workbook or whatever it was. Otherwise, they don't do that. What I saw as an educator was children who were going to enter formal learning at age 6 or 7, who have self-confidence, who can follow directions, who can sequence, who know how to explore and investigate, who know how to build consensus with their friends. So they're all ready to begin the formal task of learning.
Judy, joining us tonight is one of the people whose Waldkindergarten in British Columbia is on your list. I was telling you about her. She's contributed to Green Teacher a couple of times, and when her daughter, she teaches she's an outdoor educator in North Vancouver, and when her daughter was ready for kindergarten, she looked around and ended up starting a forest kindergarten, at her education center. And the question, she's unable to use having trouble getting access to the chat room. And the question she's asked is, do you know of other Waldkindergartens in North America that are part of the public school system as is hers?
No. No, I don't.
Okay. I do know that one, I'll tell you about this one, Judy. There is, Tricia, there is one that's just starting, also in British Columbia. It's going to be in Souk, BC, just west of the capital, Victoria, and it's part of the Victoria School District. So that's going to be part of the a publicly funded public school one, and so if anyone else. And Heather's asking what's the name of that. You'll see that on the list that we'll send that to you tomorrow. I can't remember the name of Tricia's Forest Kindergarten, but you'll have that list tomorrow. And we put all the website addresses in, so you can just quickly click the links, and you'll have a tour of the most amazing set of these pioneers in both Canada and the U.S. The other big question, Judy, and you sort of talked about a little bit when you talked about allowing the kids to climb freely in the trees and so on, and that provoked lots of comments in the chat box, and a question from another webinar presenter, Zabi McEachern, about that one forest kindergarten that she heard of was allowing kids to use to use rub sticks to make fire. I guess that would be sort of considered as risky as having kids climb trees. Do you want to sort of speak a little bit about liability and whether or not you would imagine that Waldkindergarten in Germany allow kids to learn how to rub sticks together?
Well, what I do know is these are publicly supported, although the parents do have to pay a small amount for their children to go to these Waldkindergarten, and which I have a problem with because it limits the access for all children. But anyway, I can only assume, but I don't know the real answer to this, is that they have to, once they sign their children up, they sign waivers. And of course, the teachers are trained, in first aid and, whatnot. But the point is that they trust the children and they allow the children, they obviously supervise the children, if they're doing something like rubbing sticks together or, lighting a match to make a fire, but not. It does not seem to be a problem. When I was at a forest school conference in May, it was an international forest school conference, and it was in Shropshire in England. And those, whenever the question of liability came up, people would look at Amanda and me and say, well, that would never happen in the U.S. with your with your lawsuit history. But Amanda teaches now at a school where for the last 2 weeks, the weather has been good and the children have been climbing in the trees.
Fantastic. And I guess probably too in Germany, as someone is just typing in there, of course, they have they've had a more of a social history that probably makes them much less likely to be worried about or really to deal with liability in a more recognizing that it's only when kids face risks that they end up dealing with risks and learning to deal with risks in a healthy way. In some ways, we in North America prevent kids from having opportunities to fall into a pond and therefore realize that they should be more careful around the edge of a pond. So it is a challenge and a double-edged side, and hopefully if we can start at the kindergarten level, that's going to make a big difference. Another question for you that's been typed in is, do kids are going to spend every day in the forest kindergarten or the Waldkindergarten as you were describing in your presentation? Do they ever go on field trips to other places?
It appears yes. One of the places where we were visiting, the kids were all out in the woods, and at one point, one of the teachers started pulling a couple kids in so that they could write thank you notes to the people at the pizza parlor they visited the day before.
And did you, I'm not sure if you mentioned that, okay, yeah, so they are obviously getting out then.
Mm-hmm.
Judy, you also, I'm trying to remember the question I was just about to ask you. Oh, yes, how many years have the oldest Waldkindergarten in Germany been in existence?
I think that this movement started in Denmark around, it really got going in the 80s. And and then it just started growing a little bit more around some of the Scandinavian countries and a little bit in Germany. And then recently, since the turn of the century, it's just blossomed.
And someone was asking whether or not you could, any of the Waldkindergarten you visited, at gardening programs or cooking programs. I mean, are the kids involved in any of the meal preparation? I appreciate they're pretty young for this, but any experience in either of these things?
I didn't see anything like that. At one point, I think it was on our first day, we were in the woods. It was the climbing spot that the kids had gone to that day. And I saw moss, and I saw tree circumferences, and I saw all kinds of wonderful activities to do with the kids. And I was just biting my tongue because I just wanted to do all these nature studies with them and investigations and so forth. And the teachers said they simply don't do any formal instruction of any kind. They just allow the children to decide what they're going to do. It's all at the exploration stage of learning.
And so, I guess the follow-up question to that, and that sort of answers, I think, a question for a lot of us. And yet, as an early childhood educator who's been in this field for decades, Judy, could you see through that exploration the sort of foundations being laid for literacy development in the classic sense?
Absolutely. The children were doing a lot of all this transformative symbolic thinking, which is what a good foundation for reading. They were playing with the little sticks, which is a good small motor way to develop their small motor muscles for writing and so forth. The one thing that I also noticed, as I was thinking about Germany versus the United States, for example, we have such economic diversity, which is why we started programs like Head Start. I would assume that most of these children have basic concept development in their family culture and their family tradition that we in the United States, at least, don't necessarily have. So that these kids at home would have books read to them at night, before they go to bed. They would, know their colors. They would know how to count and so forth, because they just come from a family tradition that would be doing that, which are all readiness skills for, reading and so forth. And across the board in the United States, we couldn't say that.
And what's the kind of, as Ashley, you can see in the chat box, Judy, Ashley's asking a question about, so what's the transition like, or did you talk to them about what the transition is like from Waldkindergarten into traditional or typical public school system in Germany?
It seems to be seamless.
And you mentioned there's 600 of them, so it's a pretty common practice.
700, yes.
And given how long these have been around in some places, did you have any access, or did Amanda's research look into what kind of impact those kids who were in Waldkindergarten, how did they turn out more socially adjusted, more environmentally aware than kids who were in traditional settings?
Yes, and a lot of research has shown that children who learn to read early, for example, and children who are not reading early tend to even out when they're about 8 years old, so that the other ones catch up, but the early readers don't necessarily move forward at a faster rate. And these kids come in with so much else in the readiness department for learning and being, for being aware of their world and their environment, that a lot of studies have shown that these kids are actually doing better than some of their counterparts who have not had that experience.
I think I'm going backwards a little bit to ask you this question because I didn't give a you may have, and I apologize if I didn't ask you this directly or you answered it already. Um, are the most of the Waldkindergarten, are they on public lands in Germany? Again, apologies if you've already answered that.
You have to ask the question again. You were, I couldn't hear you.
Are most of the Waldkindergarten that you visited, are they located on public land?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
There were a couple of parks, and sometimes there was a little bit of maneuvering to get to use, a particular land or whatever. But they seem to all work it out. I know that in one place, this park where they were using, the ranger said that since the Waldkindergarten has been there for the last couple of years, he sees a lot less vandalism. He sees no trash. He just sees a turnaround in the whole affective part of park use.
And someone's asking a question that they missed as well about funding, and I think you told me, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this already in the presentation. Again, apologies if you did. I've been so absorbed in this presentation, I may have missed something, but one of which was, I think you mentioned that these are publicly funded spaces, but that the parents usually have to pay a small amount. Is that the case in your?
Yes.
Okay. Another question you could see in the chat box, a good one too, and very much related to nature deficit disorder and the conversations we're having here across the U.S. and Canada, sparked by Richard Louv's work. You know, David's asking, as you can see, is there a demonstrated reduced rate of attention deficit disorder and ADHD with kids that have come through forest care?
Absolutely. And I just saw an interview with a psychiatrist from Switzerland who was talking about the children he sees that go through the Waldkindergarten. He says he does not see any child who's in a Waldkindergarten who has ADHD. He just made this absolute statement that is remarkable.
Fantastic. I just lost the question I had. I'm going to go back and get it. I have to go to a back office to pick up these questions, but we've got a couple more good ones. Okay, the question is, yes, given the experience, do you have, someone was asking about, do the kids develop a sense of place? And by that, he or she meant, do the kids, once they graduate from the Waldkindergarten and go off into the world up through public elementary and high school, do they is there a sense that they come back? Do they feel the sense of attachment to this experience they had? Was there any evidence of that?
I don't know any evidence. I can assume that they do. I do know that in Amanda's school, she's teaching in a nature immersion program here in the D.C. metropolitan area. The last 2 days in the public schools, the second and third graders had, I don't know, parent-teacher conferences or something. So the kids were off, and she had second and third graders come back to her kindergarten class. They had been in her nature immersion program when they were younger. And they took their days off to go and spend the day climbing trees with Amanda's kids. That's all I can say.
Fantastic. Another question was, I think you had a slide up there about a closing circle, presumably at the end of the day. And I guess the kids talk about it. So, and I guess the person's asking a question about what actually is talked about in the closing circle. In other words, is there a focus on reflection or self-assessment in those closing circles?
A little bit. The kids are young and they're tired at the end of the day. Some of them haven't had lunch, they're hungry and so forth. But the closing circles that we saw were, a little bit of reflection, a little bit of looking ahead, and mostly they acknowledged us So it might have been a little bit different, on the days that we were there.
And you said some of the kids might not have had lunch. Do the kids bring their own lunch from home, or is that provided as part of the program?
They bring their own lunches or their own breakfast, their own snacks, and it's wonderful. They're all waste free, which is great. And what can I add to that? I guess they've had their breakfast around 10 o'clock or so, 9 or 10 o'clock, and they've had another snack. So some of the kids, mostly they go back to their shed where the kids that go home are picked up. And so the other kids will eat their lunch, but some of them haven't eaten because they're going to go home and eat.
Got it. Okay, so breakfast is actually in the mid-morning or once they've gotten there, and which is probably a smart, thing for the Waldkinder to have figured out that it's better to make sure that every kid has breakfast and not assume they're going to eat it at home. So that's pretty clever, and then that allows them to then deal with a snack and not have to deal with a lunch. That's a clever strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else, a couple questions. One person made thanks. You nicely added that comment that I just spotted a moment ago about that safety and liability are really two quite separate issues, and making kids safe is a very separate discussion than liability. And liability really arises out of people's fears and about the problems when kids aren't taught how to be safe. And so thank you for that distinction. Just trying to grab Charlotte's question here. Are there statistics that say this outdoor free play is just as safe, if not safer, than other organized play or play using man-made equipment that I guess presumably one would see in a neighborhood park or in a school?
I have no idea.
Because obviously it's an important question, because if one is trying to encourage other Waldkindergarten in Canada or the United States, then it's important. That's kind of a crucial piece of research to be able to demonstrate that indeed there's no more accidents in a Waldkindergarten than there is in a conventional place.
I guess that's a good point.
And again, just like I'm really impressed. I'm having a hard time doing my technical jumping back and forth from screen to screen here because there's such great questions in the chat box and so many people contributing some really good insights here.
I think it's a good point about the which is safer or whatnot, and I suppose that the unpredictable nature of a part of a branch sticking out or whatever is not as safe as a sterile playground with all kinds of regulations. But as somebody else pointed out, it's the question of teaching children how to deal with it and not being afraid of injury and allowing children to learn how to deal with it. And the other part is what you lose when you have a play area with things that all have predetermined meanings as opposed to the rich source of stimulation that you have outdoors.
Judy, I've got a couple more good questions. One obvious one that hasn't been asked till now, but it's a good one, is can you talk a little bit about the involvement of parents in the Waldkindergarten? I mean, presumably they bring their kids or help them get on a little school. I don't know whether the kids arrive, the parents bring them or not, but perhaps you can give a sense of what's the typical parental involvement in a Waldkindergarten.
I didn't see any parent helpers in any of the places where we went. But in one of the places, I saw they have a different program where the children, it's the one where the kids were washing their hands and where the kid had his, was making the pulley system with a lacrosse stick. Those kids were playing by their shed that day. It was a Friday. And they do that once a week, allow their children to play close to the shed. And it allows children to have more access to the rakes and the brooms and the, whatnot. And the parents of that Waldkindergarten have built a lot of wonderful play equipment. In the Green Teacher article, there's a picture of a huge tunnel and teepee that the parents built out of branches. Also, I believe, now as I'm saying it, I'm wondering if I'm remembering correctly, but I believe that parents are, sort of on the board and have a say in what happens. As a matter of fact, Amanda and I had written to a number of Waldkindergarten and asked permission, and it was parents who wrote back to us as representatives of the school saying that we could come or couldn't come or whatever.
Excellent. Judy, let's take a break here. I've got a couple more questions, and do you have another 10, 15 minutes to stay if we have more questions?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. Folks, if you wouldn't mind, we'll put this end of session evaluation up on the screen. I have it on the screen now. It's got 5 questions. If you scroll down, you can, 2 of them are open-ended, like number 2, but the other 3 are just multiple guess questions, as we used to say in my school. And so if you can take 90 seconds to fill it out, you, as an incentive, 2 of you will receive a 1-year free digital subscription for taking the time, and I do appreciate you giving us your candid feedback. And I will be sharing the feedback with Judy after the webinar, but without people's names attached to it. So be as candid as you like. And then we'll put the question slide back up as well, so that you can ask any more questions. I've got 2 more questions to relay to Judy. But let's just pause for about 30 here and give people a chance to fill this out. You should be able to use the scroll bar on the right-hand side of the slide to get you to questions 3, 4, and 5. And Judy, while they're doing that, maybe you can have a quick look at the chat box. If you're able to use the scroll bar in the chat box, you'll get a sense of the wonderful comments and suggestions.
I can't do that. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I can. Oh, that's nice. The risk-benefit analysis.
Judy, one other question I'll ask you that someone, while people are just filling out this evaluation, one of the questions that's been asked is, what about technology? There's such a push in Canadian and American schools to introduce technology at an early age, and I think it's fair to say most people on this webinar probably think that's not a good idea, or should be a very limited one. But did you get a sense, were kids introduced to technology in any way in these Waldkindergarten?
Not at all. But that isn't to say that, the kids don't see it around them, witness that side of the kids who are making the space station.
And what was in the space station, remind?
Oh, yeah, I don't know what was in it, but they had taken their gloves and their scarves and they had woven them around branches, and they had stuck the branches into this park bench. And, when I asked them what it was, they said, oh, it's a space station.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to go back to this other slide here, and if any of you are having, didn't get a chance to finish it, you will get another chance tomorrow when I send the follow-up email it has a link to a Survey Monkey. Actually, it's a 7-question survey, and that so you'll have a chance if you didn't have a chance to hit the submit button. But I'll give you another 10 seconds to finish up, and if you haven't, better to hit the submit button and finish if you want your answers to be so noted. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here comes that other slide. And Judy, another question, I guess sort of technology related, is someone said, given that these kids are going through wearing winter clothes and so on, do they ever get in with, children's skis or snowshoeing, or do they work with tools? I guess those are two separate questions.
I don't know what, whether they wear snowshoes or, I doubt that they use skis or anything like that. Because the point is not to do a specific activity with purposeful things, but to what they want is unstructured fantasy play. And everywhere we went, this is what they said they wanted the children to do. Remember when I said I was in I wanted to do, comparing the mosses, and I wanted to have the kids put their hands around the trunks of the trees and compare the sizes. And I had all these ideas, things I wanted to do. And they said, no, they don't do anything of that sort. So I would think that sports such as skiing and so forth are not a part of their programs.
Another question asked about the public lands. Do you have any sense of what was involved for those who organized any particular Waldkindergarten? What kind of work was required by the organizers to get permission to use those public lands?
I really don't know, but the fact that this is such an important part of the infrastructure now of the school system in Germany, I would think that there are a lot of other people that are supporting them. I don't know this for a fact, but and the other thing is the Germans love the outdoors. They're always doing something. They value it so much that I would have a hard time believing that there would be a lot of problems, although, anywhere there are problems, but I really don't know the answer.
Okay, I think that's the last question I have. I think I'm going to go kind of scroll back up through the chat box because I think there were a few that we missed there. Let's just do that, and you can feel free to jump in, Judy, if you see something that you want to comment on, and I will otherwise relay the questions that I...
Oh, I see that Carolyn Walker said the rangers at our public parks only want the kids to stay on the trails. Heavens, they might encounter poison ivy. Amanda's kids at her school tell one another, the 5-year-olds tell one another, oh, that tree has poison oak on it. Be careful, don't go on that tree.
Excellent. So that's the way that's of course the best way to teach kids. But Jay's asked the question just before Carolyn's. You can still see it on the screen. What are the approaches to behavior management?
Well, I heard somebody at one point say, if you're worried about the kids crawling the walls, remove the walls. And these kids have so much purposeful opportunities. There really are not the same kinds of issues once they get outside. Now, I saw some little scuffles, or he took my glove, or whatever, and the teachers just went over and handled it, just talked to the kids and so forth. But really are not the same kinds of issues that we see when the kids are confined indoors. The kids are, first of all, there aren't as many kids. They have a lot more space to be and to explore. The teachers create this sense of community, and the space becomes a nurturing, safe environment for the kids, and they're trusted, which eliminates some of the problems. Not to mention the fact that the fresh air and the mood swings that kids get, when you're out in the air and you're listening to bird things. It has to have a impact on them.
I'm having trouble relaying this question, but it's a good one. You made a phrase that a couple people referred to in the chat box, and someone's asked a question about the phrase predetermined meaning, and I think it was in relation to the play equipment, and I'll just go back and double check unless you want to.
When a kid plays with I'm just going to jump in, Tim. When a kid plays with a plastic phone, or a kid plays with a little refrigerator, or Fisher-Price toys, all these toys have predetermined meanings. They're to be used as a phone, or to be used as a sink, or to be used as a taco, or whatever. And when the kids are out in the woods, they're transforming objects that they see into things, so that a stick can become a telephone, it can become a paintbrush, it can become a lot of different things, and it's much more open-ended, the possibilities. And that's where learning happens, because the kids are learning to become divergent thinkers, and they're creating meaning on their own, not having the meaning imposed on them with no more options to it.
Thank you, Judy. Kind of going back to a very traditional education question, but a good one. Again, for those of us who want to defend Waldkindergarten into reluctant administrators and school districts, with groups of parents. Did you get any sense? Was there any record keeping being undertaken in any of the Waldkindergarten in Germany, in the Dusseldorf area where you were visiting all of these? Did you get a sense, were there records being prepared that sort of tracked the student progress, or did parents get any kind of reports periodically about their kids?
I don't know. Great question.
Okay, well, I think we've kind of exhausted the question. Someone's asking about where in the Dusseldorf area did you go to see these Waldkindergarten? And I'll let you maybe answer that in just a moment. But in fact, if you can maybe hit the well, let me first of all thank you profusely, Judy. Not only did you deliver a fabulous presentation this evening here on the East Coast, late afternoon, of course, on the West, but you have suffered through more technical problems than any presenter should ever have to do in all the warm-up sessions you and I did to make this work. But I'm really glad that you were patient enough and tolerant enough of all the challenges we faced, and I'm so happy because this really was a really rich presentation, and I learned a lot from it, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. I'm going to answer the last question that Charlotte asked about what training the teachers had in the Waldkindergarten. They don't have any special training. They just have training as early childhood teachers. And so they have their training in their, just developmental issues and so forth, but no special training for being specifically outdoors, which is completely different from the forest schools in the UK, where those teachers are specifically trained to do activities and learning about nature. Okay, Tim.
Thank you, Judy. That's fantastic. Now I'll get you. We'll turn off the archive, and of course, if there's any more questions, I'm happy to hang around for a couple of minutes. But thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I hope you'll come back for another webinar and do subscribe to Green Teacher so you can have access to all 20 to 23 webinars that have now been recorded, and this one will be a rich addition to it. But for the next 30 days, anybody can freely view this wonderful webinar session with Judy Kane, and I hope you'll spread the word about it.